2,000 years ago, there was a city that stood at the very center of the world, Rome. An empire that stretched from Britain in the northwest, across Europe and the Middle East, all the way down to North Africa, encompassing much of the ancient Western world. But what made Rome the first true superpower of the West? Was it the invincible legions, the roads that connected three continents, the endless streams of gold and silver flowing into the city? Or was it something stranger sex, food, money, and burning ambition? In this journey, we will uncover the five forces that built an empire, the roads and trade that bound the world together, the food that fed both emperors and ordinary citizens, a sexual culture that was indulgent yet deeply unjust, an economy that created immense fortunes, and the military drive that defined Roman glory. But this is not just a story about the past. Rome is a mirror that reflects our present, because every empire, including America today, must face the same question. What can we learn from Rome? If today the world is connected by the internet, then 2,000 years ago, the Romans had their own vast network, the roads. Over 250,000 miles of roadways, tens of thousands paved with stone, stretching from Spain to Syria, from the Middle East down to North Africa. These roads were the arteries of the empire, moving legions to the frontiers, shipping grain, olive oil, and wine back to the capital, and at the same time carrying ideas, cultures, and religions across borders. Before Rome, Europe and the Mediterranean were fragmented, scattered pieces of a puzzle. Rome did what no one had done before. It bound them together into one interconnected world. Bridges over rivers, highways carved through mountains, roads cut straight across plains, all of them etched the mark of Roman power into the very landscape. For ordinary people, though, this could be a nightmare. Imagine waking up one morning and seeing a Roman engineering unit marching into your village, leveling your fields to carve a straight. It was the cold, uncompromising face of imperial power. And yet, out of that harshness came something new. For the first time in history, people across three continents were linked together. And then, people themselves began to move. Today, when scientists analyze skeletons from certain Roman towns in Britain, a remote frontier, they've found that in some places up to 20% of the population came from faraway lands. Even at the edges of the empire, Rome was a multi-ethnic society where people who had never met before now lived under the same imperial roof. One striking example is Barates, a man from Palmyra, Syria. He traveled thousands of miles and eventually died near Hadrian's Wall, where his tombstone still stands today. His story is proof of the vast movement of people across the empire. A man of the hot desert, now standing in the cold mist and rain of northern Britain, carrying with him memories of the East while living in a distant Western world. Barates embodies the flow of people, culture, and ideas that Rome made possible. And here's the irony. Rome never built this network to connect humanity. The goal was simple: move armies faster and stamp its authority deeper into the land. But the outcome went far beyond what they intended. It opened horizons, created new encounters, and changed the way people saw the world. In many ways, Rome was the internet of the ancient world, and through its network of roads, humanity realized for the first time, we were no longer just part of one small village, one isolated land, but part of a shared world. When we think of Roman food, we often picture lavish banquets, Romans reclining on couches, sipping wine, nibbling grapes, and feasting on strange delicacies. And the question people love to ask is, did Romans really eat dormice stuffed with anchovies and honey? The answer is yes, but that's only a tiny part of the story. That image comes mostly from literature and imagination, reflecting the extravagance of the wealthy elite rather than the reality of everyday life. Archaeology paints a very different picture. In Herculaneum, a town buried alongside Pompeii in the eruption of 79 AD, archaeologists uncovered an intact cesspit. It may sound disgusting, but that cesspit preserved the most honest record of what ordinary Romans actually ate. And the results were surprising. Not dormice, not bizarre concoctions, but fruits, figs, pomegranates, eggs, chicken, pork, and seafood. The people of Herculaneum, living near the coast, ate so many sea urchins that archaeologists found countless sea urchin spines still in the waste. Compared to our diets today, theirs was in fact healthy, balanced, and surprisingly nutritious. Roman cuisine, therefore, was a blend. Local ingredients, grains, fish, vegetables, meat, combined with import spices from the East, olive oil from Spain, grain from Egypt and North Africa. On a Roman table, you could taste both the familiar and the exotic, flavors from distant lands all brought together. Picture two opposite scenes. On one side, the banquet of an emperor and his aristocrats, with elaborate dishes described in vivid detail by ancient writers, where wealth was flaunted by eating the rarest, strangest foods. On the other side, the modest meal of an ordinary Roman family, rough bread, dried fish, a few figs, a bit of pork, and if they were lucky, a sprinkle of imported spice to add flavor. Food in this way reveals something profound. Rome was not only a military empire, but also an empire of exchange and connection. Every meal, whether for emperors or commoners, reflected a world already being woven together through trade and culture. When we think of ancient Rome, our imagination often paints a society drenched in pleasure and desire, a world where every limit seemed erased. All-night orgies, banquets where wine flowed like rivers, emperors and empresses drowning in lust, corruption, and absolute power. One of the most shocking tales is that of Messalina, the infamous wife of Emperor Claudius. Legend says she once challenged the prostitutes of Rome to a grotesque contest to see who could sleep with the most men in a single night. And according to the story, Messalina, the empress herself, defeated them all. Whether this tale is fact, exaggeration, or pure propaganda, we cannot be sure. But the story has echoed for nearly 2,000 years, becoming a symbol, true or not, of Rome's supposed sexual excess. It reflects something deeper about how even the ancients themselves viewed their rulers, as figures larger than life, capable of unthinkable decadence. But peel back the myth, and the reality is more complicated and, in many ways, more disturbing. Roman sexuality was not a paradise of freedom. It was a world governed by a harsh double standard. In a Roman household, the wife was expected to be absolutely faithful. One mistake, one affair could mean disgrace, ruin, even death. But the husband, he was free to do almost anything. He could sleep with male or female slaves, prostitutes, concubines, without shame, without limits. The rules of morality applied to her, but never to him. This double standard reflected the deep patriarchal obsession at the core of Roman society. A man had to be certain that the child his wife bore was truly his own blood. And so women lived under chains of control, while men claimed the mask of freedom. If you want to see the raw truth of this world, step inside the brothel of Pompeii, one of the few surviving brothels from antiquity. At first glance, tourists often laugh. 5 tiny dark rooms, each no larger than a closet, with a crude stone bed inside. On the walls, faded erotic paintings still advertise the services available, a visual menu of pleasure. Graffiti carved by clients brag in graphic detail about their exploits, turning private acts into public trophies. It is easy, even tempting, to romanticize this place, to imagine drunken Roman men staggering in, selecting a girl and leaving satisfied. Look closer, the laughter stops. Those 5 rooms were not playgrounds of freedom. They were prisons. Women slaves, the poor, the powerless, lived their lives trapped in darkness, serving a system that celebrated male indulgence while silencing female suffering. This is the true face of Roman sexuality. Outwardly, indulgence and liberation. Beneath, invisible chains binding women and the vulnerable, all under the weight of injustice. And here lies the paradox. The Romans imagined themselves as freer, wilder, less restrained than the rest of the world. But were they really free? Or were they simply trapped in another kind of prison, one built not of stone, but of desire, inequality, and power? It's a question that lingers even today. Because every society must ask itself, when we speak of freedom, whose freedom are we really talking about? Rome was not only an empire of armies, it was also an empire of money. Imagine this, from Spain to Syria, from Egypt to Britain, wherever you went, you could use the same Roman coin. A unified market spanning 3 continents, perhaps for the very first time in world history. But those coins weren't minted so people could buy grapes or pay for wine. Their primary purpose was to pay the legions, to keep the war machine running, and to fund the building of roads, bridges, temples, and monumental works like the Colosseum. Trade, in many ways, was just a byproduct of that financial engine. And yet, individuals still managed to strike it rich. In Hierapolis, a small inland town in modern-day Turkey, a textile merchant proudly carved into his tombstone that he had made more than 80 journeys to Rome in his lifetime. 80 times crossing the Mediterranean, bringing cloth to the heart of the empire to sell to its elite. That single inscription shows how Rome drew in not only gold, grain, and olive oil, but also the ambition for wealth from the farthest corners of its dominion. But don't be deceived into thinking everyone shared in that prosperity. The vast majority of Romans were farmers, living off small plots of land, eating and consuming goods produced within just 10 miles of their homes. Long-distance trade olive oil from Spain, grain from Egypt, spices from the East was something that touched mainly the wealthy and the merchant class. Rome had created an economy that, in many ways, looks familiar to us today. But there was one crucial difference. It was largely unregulated. No central bank, no modern monetary policy. The state did step in at times, most notably to control the price of grain, to keep the masses of Rome fed. But overall, it was a loosely managed system, full of opportunity on one hand and risk on the other. And perhaps that parallel is what should give us pause. Rome's economy, so familiar, yet so chaotic, might not just be history. It might be a warning. In Rome, war was the rule, peace was the exception. The Romans did not live in a world where war happened occasionally. They lived in a world where war was the default state, the very heartbeat of the empire. For the Roman elite, the greatest ambition of a young boy was not to become a scholar or a merchant. It was to one day earn the honor of a triumph, the lavish procession of a victorious general. Picture it, a general riding a gilded chariot, his soldiers marching behind him in celebration, prisoners and treasures displayed in front, and all of Rome echoing with cheers. This was the pinnacle of Roman glory, the burning dream of every aristocratic young man. And yet, there was a strange paradox. Rome was a society deeply militarized to its core, and still, soldiers were not allowed inside the city. The heart of the empire, the city of Rome itself, was almost a demilitarized zone. The legions could only enter on one occasion, the triumph. They would march in, hail their general, and then withdraw. Even in a society that glorified war, the Romans wanted to keep the soul of their capital free from the shadow of the legions. Over time, as the empire stopped expanding, when great conquests gave way to occupation and policing, the Roman army began to change. Forts on the frontier were no longer only barracks for soldiers, they slowly became family communities. At Vindolanda, a fort near Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, archaeologists uncovered remarkable traces. Tiny shoes belonging to children, wax tablets with letters written by soldiers' wives, describing ordinary daily life in the middle of a military camp. A warm human glimpse in the heart of a society we imagine only in terms of swords and shields. Rome began in conquest, but as its borders stabilized, frontier forts took on the shape of small towns, where women and children lived alongside soldiers. The legions were not only steel and discipline, they also carried the breath of everyday life. Of course, Rome was still a brutal and unequal empire. This is not a model we would ever want to copy. No one would want to live as a woman in Rome, and no one would ever choose to live as a slave. But there is one lesson that does stand out, something that still challenges us today. Rome's view of migration and citizenship. In Rome, there was no such thing as an illegal immigrant, and people moved freely across regions, and Rome had a tradition of absorption. Citizenship was often granted gradually, sometimes through military service, sometimes through loyalty to the empire, and by the 3rd century, it had been extended to nearly all free people across the empire. Rome was a society that incorporated outsiders, a place that drew in people from everywhere. Even Rome's founding myths reflect this. Romulus and Remus, abandoned children raised by a wolf, went on to become the founders of the city. Or Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled his burning city, seeking refuge in Italy, where he laid the roots of a new people. From the very beginning, Rome imagined itself as a home for exiles, refugees, and the defeated. And so the question comes to us today: is America the Rome of our time? A nation built by immigrants, by those who left their homeland seeking new hope. Do we still hold on to that spirit? Or are we forgetting the very story that gave birth to us? Rome fell, but the roads they built, the ideas they planted, and the warnings they left behind are still all around us. Every time we look at Rome, we are not just looking at history, we are staring into a mirror of ourselves. The question is, what reflection will we choose to see? An America that grows stronger, learning from Rome's mistakes, or an America that repeats the same tragedy that once buried the greatest empire of the West? If history is a conversation with the past, then now it's our turn to speak. So what do you think? What lessons can America learn from Rome? Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so we can continue uncovering the mysteries of human history together.